The P-47 Thunderbolt was built to survive, armored, massive, and nearly unstoppable at high altitude. Yet, as the war turned, pilots found themselves ordered lower, slower, and deeper into enemy fire. Their survival now working against them. Every mission meant flying into zones where German gunners waited, and escape routes vanished. How did an aircraft famous for its protection become a pilot's trap? What happened when the enemy learned exactly how to shoot it down? Republic aviation engineers shaped the P-47 Thunderbolt for survival, not subtlety. With its massive airframe and wide radial engine, the aircraft was a fortress in the sky. Armor plating surrounded the cockpit, shielding the pilot from gunfire and shrapnel. Self-sealing fuel tanks and a thick firewall added layers of protection, while the Pratt & Whitney R-Twin 800 engine, nearly as wide as the fuselage itself, could keep running with cylinders shot out or oil leaking. The Thunderbolt's designers believed size and strength would keep pilots alive at altitude, where speed and maneuvering could still offer a way out. The result was a fighter that dominated on paper and in the field. Its empty weight topped 10,000 pounds, heavier than most single-engine fighters of the war. Nearly half a ton of armor and protective material was built in from the start. The cockpit sat high, surrounded by steel and bulletproof glass, with thick slabs of metal underfoot and behind the pilot's head. The radial engine's round profile offered no coolant lines to rupture, no fragile radiators to puncture. In air combat, the Thunderbolt could take hits that would cripple a lighter plane and still make it home. This toughness was legendary. Luftwaffe pilots, including ace Heinz Bahr, noted that the Thunderbolt could absorb an astounding amount of lead and had to be handled very carefully. Stories spread of aircraft returning with holes in wings, missing control surfaces, and engines coughing oil yet still able to land. The airframe's bulk, once a criticism, became its calling card. Pilots trusted the Jug to bring them back through flak and gunfire that would down anything else. But every added pound, every inch of armor, made the P-47 impossible to miss. The silhouette was enormous. The engine cowling alone was nearly 5 feet across, and the wings stretched more than 40 feet tip to tip. In formation, the Thunderbolt's size made it stand out against the sky. On the ground, its bulk drew stares. In the air, it drew fire. Commanders saw an aircraft that could survive punishment and began to believe it could survive anything. As confidence in the design grew, so did the missions. The Thunderbolt was assigned not just to protect bombers at high altitude, but to dive into enemy territory, attack ground targets, and return through curtains of flak. The very features that made it survivable at 25,000 feet, armor, weight, and a powerful engine, made it the most visible and tempting target when flying low and slow. Durability became an invitation for exposure. The more the aircraft could take, the more it was asked to endure. By design, the Thunderbolt was built to survive. In practice, it became the aircraft that everyone could see and everyone wanted to shoot down. At 25,000 feet, the Thunderbolt ruled the air. 8th Air Force planners sent P-47 groups to meet bombers over Germany, forming tight escorts above the clouds. Here, the aircraft's bulk and power became assets, not liabilities. The turbo, supercharged radial engine kept its edge at altitude, where thin air sapped the strength of German fighters. Pilots could reach speeds of over 430 miles per hour, with enough climb to outpace most threats. In these high bands, the air was clean of flak, and the enemy's 20mm and 37mm guns could not reach. Records suggest the P-47 achieved an aerial kill ratio of 4.6 to 1 in these conditions. For every Thunderbolt lost in air combat, 4 enemy aircraft were destroyed. The numbers told a story of dominance. Bomber formations stretching for miles depended on these escorts to break up attacks from Bf-109s and FW-190s. The Thunderbolt's 850 caliber guns in its wings shredded attackers before they could close. Altitude offered more than just a firing position. At 30,000 feet, the Thunderbolt's speed and energy allowed pilots to choose their fights. If the odds turned, they could dive away, using gravity to gain even more speed. Disengagement was possible. A damaged aircraft could limp home, losing altitude gradually, with time to make decisions. Above the flak and out of reach of small arms fire, survival was a function of skill and altitude, not just armor. The doctrine was clear. Stay high, stay fast, stay alive. Every tactical manual and mission briefing reinforced the same logic. Altitude was safety. The Thunderbolt's strengths, its engine, its protection, its firepower, were designed for these heights. 8th Air Force planners built their strategy around it, assigning P-47s to fly top cover, intercept enemy fighters, and shepherd bombers through the deadliest airspace in Europe. But the war did not stand still. As the front lines moved and new needs took shape, the Thunderbolt's altitude advantage began to erode. The very qualities that made it a fortress above the clouds would be tested in a different kind of battle, one that demanded leaving safety behind. The numbers that once spoke of dominance would come to mean something else entirely, as missions dropped lower and the margin for survival narrowed with every foot lost. Colonel Hubert Zemke took command of the 56th Fighter Group in September 1942, stepping into a training pipeline already strained to breaking. The P-47 Thunderbolt, with its weight and complexity, demanded more from pilots than any trainer could provide. No dual-seat version existed. Every new pilot faced the full power of the aircraft alone, often after only a handful of hours in lighter machines. At Millville Army Airfield in New Jersey, the transition cost the lives of 18 pilots and destroyed 41 Thunderbolts before a single combat mission was flown. The conversion phase became a gauntlet, not a formality. Across the United States Army Air Forces, records show 52,651 training accidents during the war, 14,903 fatalities, 13,873 aircraft written off. For the P-47, the step from the T-6 Texan trainer to operational readiness was a leap into the unknown, with the aircraft's mass and torque punishing hesitation. Pilots under Zemke's command were often young, many just months out of flight school. The Thunderbolt's massive radial engine produced torque that could twist the aircraft out of control during takeoff or slow-speed maneuvering. Training accidents at Millville follow a pattern: a flat turn at 300 feet after takeoff, a spin at 3,000 feet during instrument practice, an engine cut out on approach with a tow target still attached. In one case, a pilot's wife watched from the officers' club as his P-47 rolled inverted and dove into the ground. Another pair collided at 2,000 feet, neither escaping by parachute. These were not isolated incidents. The aircraft's reputation for toughness masked a brittle reality. The system absorbed loss as routine. Pilots who survived the conversion phase carried the burden of classmates lost to training, not combat. The institution accepted this attrition as the price of fielding a force capable of flying the Thunderbolt's missions. There was no pause to reconsider. The demand for pilots was relentless, and the pipeline kept moving. By the time these men reached operational squadrons, they had already seen the cost of flying the P-47. Every landing was a test. Every training sortie could become a final flight. The aircraft that promised survival at altitude demanded it first on the ground, in peacetime skies, before the enemy ever fired a shot. 9th Air Force planners, pressed by the demands of a ground war racing across France, began to see the P-47 Thunderbolt as something more than an escort. The Mustang had taken over the high-altitude runs. What the advancing armies needed now was a sledgehammer, something that could break rail lines, destroy tanks, and shatter road columns ahead of the Allied push. The Thunderbolt, with its thick armor and heavy frame, fit the new doctrine. Orders sent squadrons low, loaded with bombs, rockets, and gun ammunition. Ordnance loads could reach up to 2,500 pounds, 2 500-pound bombs under the wings, 10 rockets slung beneath, and 8 50-caliber guns fully loaded. The aircraft that once soared at 25,000 feet now dove toward targets at 500 feet, sometimes lower. Mission reports from 1944 and 1945 describe attack runs as low as 50 feet above hedgerows and rail yards. The ground below was anything but empty. German flak batteries, manned by Flakwaffe crews with months of experience, layered their defenses. Light 20mm guns, Flak Vierling 38s, lined the approaches to bridges and rail junctions. Medium 37mm cannons waited behind, ready to catch Thunderbolts as they pulled up from their attack runs. The sky, once a sanctuary above the clouds, became a grid of overlapping kill zones. Each mission profile was a descent into denser fire. The armor that had been designed to stop a single burst now faced a wall of shells, each hit stacking damage on the last. Records from the Brazilian Air Force, flying P-47Ds in northern Italy, offer a stark measure of what this meant. Of 48 Thunderbolts flown into combat, 15 were lost to flak in just 6 months. Nearly a third of the squadron's aircraft were brought down by ground fire. The pattern held across Allied units. The lower the altitude, the heavier the losses. Flak crews learned the shapes and sounds of the American fighter bombers. They waited for the moment when an aircraft's dive bled away its speed, when the predictable recovery arc made escape impossible. Every run grew more dangerous as the enemy adapted, repositioning batteries to cover likely approach and withdrawal routes. Pilots trusted the Jug's protection, but the reality was simple. The closer they flew to the ground, the more they became targets for every gun within range. Armor meant survival against a lucky shot. It did not mean immunity from 100. The sky over Normandy, the Falaise pocket, and the retreating German columns grew thick with flak bursts. On some days, the air itself seemed to turn solid. Survivors returned with wings shredded, engines leaking oil, and control cables nearly severed. Others did not return at all. The command pivot had turned the Thunderbolt's greatest strength into a liability. Durability became the reason to send pilots lower, into missions where each foot of lost altitude meant a greater chance of not coming back. The aircraft that once escaped by climbing away now had nowhere to go but forward, through layers of fire that only grew thicker with each passing day. Durability had become exposure, and exposure had become inevitability. By the summer of 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt was no longer just a presence in the sky. It had become a priority target. Its record spoke for itself. Over 7,000 enemy aircraft destroyed, with thousands more tanks, locomotives, and vehicles left burning along the roads of France and Germany. The effectiveness of the Thunderbolt's ground attacks did not go unnoticed. German commanders read after-action reports and watched columns disappear under rocket and machine gun fire, and they began to shift strategy. Flak batteries were repositioned along likely approach routes. Rail yards, bridges, and supply convoys bristled with hidden guns, waiting for the familiar shape of the Jug to appear on the horizon. Luftwaffe fighter units, stretched thin by losses, received explicit orders to focus on the most dangerous threat to their ground forces. The Thunderbolt's size and silhouette made identification easy. Its repeated success made it a symbol of Allied air power and a magnet for every available gun. Flak crews developed a rhythm. Let the first pass come, then saturate the sky as the Thunderbolt pulled up from its dive, slower and more vulnerable than before. The sequence became routine. Pilots who survived the initial barrage often found themselves tracked by fighters waiting just beyond the flak's reach, ready to finish what the ground crews had started. Every measure of success, each destroyed train, and each shattered tank tightened the crosshairs. The more damage the Thunderbolt inflicted, the more concentrated the enemy's response became. In the calculus of survival, effectiveness carried its own penalty. The aircraft's reputation as a tank in the air ensured it was always at the top of the enemy's list, and every mission deepened the cycle. Attack, attract fire, survive, or become the next confirmed kill. Confidence in the P-47's survivability did not come from theory. It came from missions where pilots returned in aircraft that should not have flown. Captain Robert S. Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group survived a direct hit from a German 20mm cannon that shredded his engine and set a fire inside the cockpit. Hydraulic fluid sprayed through the cabin, injuring him and filling the cockpit with smoke. Despite the damage, Johnson managed to fly the crippled Thunderbolt back to England, landing with the controls nearly locked and the canopy scorched. Incidents like this built a sense of invincibility among pilots and their commanders. Each battered return seemed to prove the aircraft's promise. If one man could make it home through fire, so could the next. The result was a quiet escalation. Missions grew longer and bolder. Sorties pushed deeper into enemy territory, often with the expectation that armor would cover every risk. Yet the record remains unfinished. For every story of survival, there are gaps. Many German anti-aircraft units kept incomplete or lost records, and Allied historians have to piece together fragments from crash sites and missing aircraft lists. Records suggest the true cost of this confidence is still debated. Damage reports document aircraft riddled with holes, but they cannot count the number of pilots who vanished without a trace. Survivability, in the end, became a paradox. The more the P-47 proved it could take, the more it was asked to endure, and the more it was sent into situations where even the best armor could not guarantee a way home. Today, ground attack pilots still fly missions that make them the first targets, just as in 1944. Armor and technology can only delay exposure. The logic that sent Thunderbolts low over Normandy survives in every modern war. Survivability invites risk, and risk is never shared equally. In the calculus of air power, someone always pays the price for progress. Consider who flies lowest and who decides they must.